I'm going to pick my introduction. Jersey Nets up here. Hi. You doing? I'm Cleve Corner. I'm the manager of author and speaker engagement at the Pratt Library. Thanks for coming out this evening. 45 minutes, and then we're going to take your questions. After that, we'll do a brief signing round. Right here. Theresa Runstedtler to the Pratt Library to discuss her latest book, Blackball. In it, she provides a history of the National Basketball Association in the 1970s. That era of professional basketball was personified by an influx of Black players that not only changed the way the game was played, but challenged team ownership to procure higher pay and greater influence. Their efforts paved the way for future players and was integral to the NBA's meteoric growth. Theresa Runstedtler is an African-American history professor at American University. She's the author of Jack Johnson, Rebel Sojourner, Boxing in the Shadow of the Global Color Line. Dave Zirin, who will be here at the end of April, author and sports editor of The Nation magazine, commented that with Blackball, Runstedtler isn't so much rewriting history as reclaiming it. The 1970s were an utterly transformative incubation period for the development of the game we see today. It was the first time the players had a taste of actual labor power. While the NBA portrays this period as a time that almost wrecked the league, Runstedtler gives us a far more nuanced and honest reading. This is necessary and anti-racist correction. This is a necessary and anti-racist correction and should inspire more of us to re-examine the 1970s, a period of pain, but also progress. The Los Angeles Times called the book a wise, engaging, and frankly overdue survey of a crucial moment in sports history. Blackball is a timely read at a moment when professional athletes are more outspoken than ever on social issues, and when it's clear that sports and society are inextricably linked. And in Publisher Weekly's starred review, they wrote, Runstedtler's superior storytelling, buoyed by expert research, casts a new light on the league's complex history. This savvy reappraisal of the NBA's tumultuous evolution soars. It's my great pleasure to welcome Theresa Runstedtler.
Thanks so much for that introduction. I hope I can live up to it. All right, so I'm going to do a combination of talking about the book and then also reading selections from it. I've also got a little bit of a PowerPoint so I can show you some of the images from the book as well. But before I get started, let me just figure out where I can put my stuff. Um, I want to thank the Enoch Pratt Free Library for inviting me to come give this talk. Thank you so much to everyone who has come out tonight to support me. I see some of my mom friends in the audience, and they've had to listen to me moan and groan about writing this book for the last 3 years. And we had uh, uh, article. If I just the other side, and I'm very, very happy with the kind of reception that it's getting. Um, and now after many years of course solitary little secret office, um, um, normally I'm a quiet person by nature. Things while I was on the team, especially the race and labor dynamics of the NBA. So let me just read a little section of how that really informed the writing of this book. So even from the vantage point of a dancer, it was hard to miss the league's unspoken racial politics. In the early years, with Isaiah Thomas as general manager and a shifting slate of owners, the dance pack had a surprising amount of freedom. We didn't look like the typical NBA dance team. We were more urban athletic than sexy glamour. There was no fixation on weight, paying homage to African American hip hop culture. We wore coveralls, bandanas, and sequin jerseys, and we danced to the latest rap and R&B hits. Our team was made up of women and men of all different races and ethnicities. After Thomas left, and the team was later sold to Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, then owners of the Toronto Maple Leafs of the National Hockey League, things changed. This is a post Maple Leaf Sport and Entertainment picture. You'll see what I mean. As a group, the dance pack became skinnier. And I think in a lot of ways, the NBA from the 90s into the early 80s could be heads, and historian said to me, ugh, like, yeah, that was the time when all the players were on drugs, when they were fighting each other on the court, getting into trouble. And as I started to read popular retellings of this period, I mean, according to these players from the 70s would have made Ja Morant blush, right? Made him look like a choir boy. In fact, I begin the book, let me just make sure I've got this correct. I begin the book with Chris Cobbs's infamous 1980 expose on the supposed cocaine crisis in the league. Okay, so let me just read first few paragraphs to set the scene. NBA and cocaine, nothing to snort at, declared the Los Angeles Times headline wryly. There are no reliable figures on the use of cocaine by players, Times staff writer Chris Cobbs admitted, but estimates by people in the game range from 40 to 75%, with perhaps as many as 10% getting high with freebase. I mean, come on, 40 to 75%? That's a massive range. When that story ran in August 1980, the National Basketball Association, or NBA, appeared to be a league in crisis. And given that around 75% of the league's players were African American, it appeared to be a Black crisis. Cobbs's expose came in the wake of well-publicized drug arrests of several Black players for possession of minor quantities of cocaine. Not only had game attendance and television ratings dipped in recent years, but now professional basketball seemed to be on the verge of a cocaine epidemic. This was a public relations nightmare for a majority Black league that white sports fans already perceived as violent, criminal, and out of control. Black ball players' use of cocaine, an expensive drug typically associated with white celebrities, jet setters, and professionals. Of course, this was 1980, not 1986, right? So in 1980, the primary users of powder cocaine were still wealthy white folks. So their use of cocaine was yet another reminder of their undeserved fortune. At a time when the rest of the United States was still reeling from a decade of stagflation and economic recession, NBA players had become some of the highest paid professional athletes in the world. Many of them, Cobbs noted, came from, and I'm taking these quotes directly from Cobbs, unstable families in inner city ghettos and could not seem to handle their sudden wealth. Also, as one anonymous source told Cobbs, quote, again, anonymous source, the players are so street smart, their sophistication is just below that of a hardened convict. They know every angle on how to get women and drugs. They are so far ahead of the security men, it's unbelievable. They know every hustle, end quote. I mean, obviously did not hold back in this article. The chaos in the NBA seemed to mirror the chaos, crime, and violence in the streets of American cities. In both cases, young Black men were to blame. For his reporting, Cobbs won the Investigative Series Award from the Basketball Writers Association of America. Although rife with rumor and speculation, Cobbs's expose has, for the most part, been accepted uncritically as emblematic of the supposed decline of professional basketball throughout the 1970s. As the oft-repeated narrative goes, Black players brought their immaturity, selfishness, drug abuse, violence, and criminality, a very microcosm of America's urban crisis, to the NBA. They lacked character and morality, and it showed not only in how they conducted themselves off the court, but also in how they played basketball. They had imported their aggressive, flashy, individualistic, and above-the-rim style from the playgrounds of Black neighborhoods to the pro game. A once honorable and disciplined white game of teamwork and set plays had devolved into anarchy. As African American players came to dominate professional basketball over the course of the 70s, their bad behavior had tarnished its reputation, and their exorbitant salary demands had pushed it to the brink of financial ruin. And so that was the story that I first encountered in a lot of the histories of this period of professional basketball. And I found that most historians tended to just reproduce uncritically this narrative about a cocaine epidemic in professional basketball at that time without ever actually digging into whether or not it was true, what kind of cultural work it was doing amid the racial politics of the era. But for me, it sparked so many questions because I'm cynical. I'm a very cynical person. So I was like, 40 to 75%, how would a league function if this many folks were getting high all the time and couldn't control themselves? So I wanted to figure out, where did this narrative of the supposedly lazy, selfish, drug addicted, and even criminal Black ball player come from? And, you know, where did this narrative of Black ball players as being the cause of the decline of the NBA in this period, where did that come from? Were the 1970s really a terrible period for basketball? Because what I knew was that in the 1970s, the NBA, professional basketball more generally, became more demographically and stylistically Black. So I couldn't help but wonder if this was actually a racialized narrative about the growing dominance of Black athletes in professional sports. I also knew that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Earl the Pearl Monroe, even somebody like Dr. J, Julius Erving, that they were doing these amazing feats on the court. And that many of them were also speaking back to the politics of the period. So for me, there was a disconnect between what I knew anecdotally about the 70s and what all of these histories were telling me. So I couldn't help but wonder if this negative press represented a wider backlash against the growing dominance of Black players in the pro game, and by extension, the growing power and freedom of African Americans, especially African American men, in the United States over the course of the 70s. So these were the questions that really started animating my research. Okay, now just to give you a sense of what the demographics of pro ball look like, we have to remember that the NBA actually only drafted its first Black players in 1950. Okay, the likes of Chuck Cooper and Earl Lloyd. By the late 1960s, one of the things that I talk about in the book was the fact that the creation of the American Basketball Association, which was a rival league to the NBA, actually opened up the floodgates for Black players to start joining the professional ranks. And so any form of informal quota that existed in the NBA, where it was sort of an unspoken rule that you could only have a certain number of Black players per team. You didn't want the team to get too Black. That really went away with the advent of the ABA. At the same time, you also had salaries going up just as the number of Black players started going up. Okay. So by the time you get to the late 1960s, of course, the days of Bill Russell, 58% of NBA players were Black. And by the mid-1970s, the league was about 75% Black. By the 1980s, we're looking at a league that's 80% Black. And yet, at the very same time, the fan base, or at least from the perspective of the NBA administration, the imagined fan was white and male. Okay, and this really drove a lot of the racial politics of the league at that time. Okay, and then also too, off the court during this entire time, you had Black power and the continued fight over racial integration. So in some ways, the league became a very hyper-visible example of racial integration that was working, right? In other sectors of society, things were still lagging behind. But on the court, at least, this showed that if you just gave African Americans a chance, that they could compete. They could not just compete, but dominate. Okay? All right. So in the first section of the book, called Challenging Monopoly, I look at the roots of the kind of backlash against Black players in this practices of the NBA, everything from blacklisting. First chapter looks at Connie Hawkins v. the NBA, a player who had alleged ties to a gambling scandal, which he didn't have any ties, but he got, and the league just said to touch you, but that's that. Ended up having to sue the league from the college draft team for their career seeded team to decide whether or not on a right there was free agency. Indies. Black is metaphorical, Spencer Haywood, he actually he ended up going north to escape racial violence. To say, by the we're in a full-fledged talent war. We're fighting over nine, the ABA Institute clause. In their bylaws so that its teams could draft for the NBA. And we're in the midst of March Madness right now, fueled by the largely uncommon which was owned by and Haywood later found out was that the required so many extra years of service by Haywood that he would have been, you know, middle age. Haywood ended up The young star was openly defying the mores of white paternalism and possession that had long returned to his hotel room, which happened to adjoin with Bill Ringsby's room. Through the wall, the beleaguered star heard Ringsby say that, quote, he wasn't going to let that black N push him around. Another time, Haywood overheard the Rockets owner tell ABA Commissioner Dolph that he was not a good N and that they would not be able to deal with him like they could with a white man. Right? So you get a sense of the kind of negotiations and racial politics of those negotiations in the early 70s. A few an inducing breach of contract. Notice things be maintained that the star's head with unreasonable. The suit reeked of sentiment against the Rockets star. Grown his greedy tent. This is a quote. Just because fraud. Right. So this is a guy who does not give up. Right. Now as the twists and turns of that um, Denver Rockets was playing out East. I programs, paper cups, star. Or refusing to play if Hay their money. Give, right? So the chaos caused by the Haywood affair was apparently, quote, bad for the image of the game and set, quote, a bad example for American youth. So this guy was essentially dragged through the mud for attempting a nice car to drive. The system protect me. Incisive critiques of the inequalities within this, and Haywood was no exception to that. So Haywood ended up suing the NBA the courts ended up siding with him and let him play in the NBA. And this marked the end of the 4-year rule. So in many respects, all day reserved and initiated these Black players was actually seen in a period. Ball players' growing celebrity, wealth, and power, it is hardly surprising urban decline. Even so, it was not just about the money. Okay. We're remaking the professional game by infusing it with the once objects of white fascination, playground ball, and the Black City attitude that went along with it became popular targets of white disdain, deemed selfish, unnecessarily flamboyant, and hostile he said, quote, basically playground player, end quote. Development at in the United States. And this is what he said. Cracks in the cement, basket rims that are bent and whatnot. So you kind of deviate the style and you kind of compensate for different things. And quote. To Monroe, this approach to the game had leaped from African American playgrounds to the professional leagues. Okay, so that gives you a sense of backlash. I talk about decline where as much about 70s. So let me just find cocaine exit New Jersey. So Chris Cobbs is in the NBA went national. Newspapers from across the country reprinted and excerpted the Los Angeles Times, never questioning its veracity. His allegations made their way onto television. But CBS could not even get the story right. Charles Kuralt later had to apologize for 2 errors in their report. They accidentally photo of David Thompson, celebrities in 1980. The majority Black league became the target of manic. Their prop socio shocking revelation put NBA on started that big step all in black and white in the commissioner's is to the hardship of prison life. Perhaps the League could scare quote unquote crack crisis. Right? So but in associations for African American, for the most part, it was understood um, as a drug that was used by white socialites in order of the time. Does that make sense? The mid to late 80s and early Absolutely. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Right. What happened was that folks like Alan Iverson took it to its logical conclusion. And I remember back in the late 90s, he would come to the games in his puffer coat and his chains aggressively, which when I first started doing this project, people were like, but the NBA is so progressive. They are very careful about putting boundaries. Now, with all of the protests, yeah, I intervene and say, you can't do without wrecking the marketing potential of them being a progressive league. And so I think that progressive with in limits is that one of the true tragedies of 19 players. The ones who actually made it into the NBA, any years of service that they gave to the ABA did not count to merger teams actually merged to the end. So there were all sorts of nothing. There was nothing set up in terms of healthcare, in terms of pension, anything else. And out like the preparing it. In terms of their popularity.
You've been located downtown in Toronto?
Yeah.
That one and that one.
Okay. Yes.
I remember when you were talking about security. Even our nicknames, they've done an investigation on everything. They were called Knicks in New York.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And having franchises in the UK of all places because of the advent of faster air travel. So even back then, they were looking to expand not just nationally, but internationally.